start with Jason. So I have the first question is, how do you regulate for the time temperature matrix required for refrigeration of harvested products?
All right. That's actually through the health department that does that. But my understanding is that they take the water and air temperature and they average it for the last several years. They get a monthly average, and then they apply that to how long you have to get the harvested oysters to mechanical refrigeration, and then also how long they have to get that oyster down to the right temperature for the market. So hottest months, you've got a very small amount of time to get them from reef to cooling, pretty much. So it's all based on the air temperature.
Gotcha. Interesting. Let's go with our next question. I think this is for you, Bill, but I think everybody might be able to throw in a comment here. As AOC increases across the Gulf of Mexico, are states looking at developing incentives for the establishment of private hatcheries to meet the anticipated need for seeds?
Sure, and I think that AOC for Louisiana uses the term alternative oyster culture for this. I think that's what AOC, Earl, I think you got that right. I don't know that any states are looking to develop incentives. That's an interesting idea. Earl, what we've done is Auburn stepped out. We announced 2018, I forget our last year. We had private individuals come to us and say that they wanted to start private hatcheries, and so we voluntarily left production of seed, and then Auburn has now tries to support those hatcheries, commercial hatcheries. We don't try to grow oysters for them, but we try to give them technical expertise because we recognize that the industry needs seed, so you have to have hatcheries. I think that will develop, but frankly, we've seen very high demand for seed, and so there's certainly a commercial opportunity there.
Excellent. Anybody else have a thought on that? Perfect. All right, next question. For Dr. Fox, how do you think oysters will fare after the big barge crash and spill in Galveston Bay in 2019?
Well, that was what I was alluding to by, you know, there's a stranglehold on availability of oysters whenever you have any kind of toxic spill in Galveston Bay, because it, you know, if it's outside the fishing season from November to April, you're really left with only the private leases, and they're only found in Galveston Bay. And so when you close Galveston Bay, you can't buy a Texas oyster in Texas. So as I mentioned, the thing to do is to spread the risk through aquaculture, and you know, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I think Parks and Wildlife at one time was interested in increasing the lease program down from Galveston Bay into other bays of Texas, slowly but surely. But you know, we got whacked by Hurricane Harvey right when that discussion was started, and so we might have to revisit that. But certainly, I think aquaculture is a way to, you know, to spread out that risk.
Okay. Wonderful. Yeah, I know we had mentioned that before. It's definitely an interesting event. Let's see. Dr. Bill Walton, let's see. What salinity is needed for oyster aquaculture, and do you use the culture in the aquaculture process at all?
Sure. So turns out that when we think of the wild populations that Jason was talking about, many people think of oysters thriving at sort of a mid-salinity. So full ocean is, call it 35 parts per thousand. And many people think of oysters really thriving in the Gulf in sort of 10 to 20 parts per thousand areas, what we'd call the brackish waters, or at least estuarine waters. It turns out that oysters survive in full ocean salinity. It's just that many of their predators and some of their diseases also thrive in salty conditions. So we can grow oysters in very salty areas because you can protect them from predators, and they grow so fast that the most common disease that we have currently for oysters, called dermo, tends not to kill them within 1 year. So they may acquire it before harvest, but that doesn't hurt people. It's like spots on apples. It doesn't hurt people. But as a farmer, you're able to harvest before that becomes a problem. So we can grow them at full ocean salinity. Oh, and sorry, for culture, we do use, we actually, Jason over at Claude Petit would take whole oyster shells and put them in tanks, and the larvae would attach to those shells to make clusters. We take oyster shells and grind them into sand, and we let the oysters attach to that. And there's only enough room on each piece of sand for one oyster. And so that's how we get those single oysters. We use culture, we just use microculture.
Very interesting. Great. I guess along similar lines of talking salinity, Jason, was or is 2019 a good season due to lower salinity? If so, what caused the lower salinity?
Well, I'm not sure if it's all because of the lower salinity. I can tell you what causes that. Our Mobile Tensaw Delta, we basically get all of the water flowing out of mid to lower Alabama comes through there. And so we have a lot of fresh water that comes down the western coast and goes over our reefs. So as I had mentioned periodically, typically this happens periodically, and it helps to control the drills and things that are on there. It's really the extended freshets that are also coupled with the high water temperatures and low oxygen events at the same time that really knocked us out. In 2017 and in 19, we didn't really get those all together. We had some low salinity, and then we had some low oxygen, and they happened at different parts of the year. Water itself, when it's warmer in the hottest parts of the year, it holds less oxygen in it to begin with. Animals in the middle of summer, their metabolisms are ramped up. They need more resources. They need more oxygen. They need more everything. So when they're stressed out, all of these things coupled together just are just a disaster for oysters.
Okay. Well, it looks like we might have about 1 more minute, so I've got one last question, and then we'll wrap it up. Our last question is for Jason. What metric does the state use to open and close bars to harvest? So we talked about that a little bit before. And then also, is Alabama putting in restoration reefs, example in the Upper Bay, as spawning reefs that are intended to be unharvested habitat to produce larvae for the harvest reefs?
Okay. The metric for opening and closing, it's not a set metric. I think there are some agencies that'll say, oh, we have a density of this amount of oysters per reef. That's when we open, and then these reefs with a lower density than that, they don't work. What we do is with our annual dives, we try to determine about how many sacks are on a reef and how the reefs are doing. We set I'll call it a flexible goal. I don't want to call it a quota, a flexible goal. And then we say, we kind of back off from what our estimate of the whole harvest is by a certain percentage, whatever we discuss. And that may change as well. It's pretty dynamic, but we'll open up reef to harvest, and we can even change that harvest goal in the middle of the season, and we can get back out and survey some certain areas. Sometimes the harvesters will get in areas that we didn't actually survey because we do a random survey, and we don't have the personnel to cover everything, and they're really good at finding oysters, so they'll find a spot. So we can include those into the harvest estimate that we kind of missed during our assay, or we can go the other way around, where it's just like, we predicted that there'd be more production, and we need to shut things down a little bit earlier too. The second thing I'm gonna try to keep brief about the planting and restoring oysters in the Upper Bay. We naturally have oysters in the Upper Bay. There's a lot of challenges to planting in waters that are closed. Our Upper Bay waters are really closed. They're prohibited, restricted, or conditionally restricted. Really, the conditionally approved waters are the waters that people harvest for consumption. And so we have to get over challenges when you restore something in an area that's not really approved for harvest, but the oysters are doing really well. You can open up they call it a attractive nuisance, where folks still go out there and harvest in water that and the oysters may or may not be conducive for consumption. And so you can really put a great health risk on folks by not doing that correctly. I'm not saying that we'll never do that, but there are a lot of things to overcome before we do restoration reefs in waters not open for consumption or harvest for consumpmption. I know it's a lot longer than
That's okay. That's
short answer for that one.
Not a problem. We still have lots of questions coming in. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so everything that's submitted, I will try to include in our follow-up email and get back with everyone. Should be at least or at most a week, and I'll have all of our recordings and our questions answered for everybody. But thank you so much for everyone that was able to join us today. If you do have a few minutes, we would really appreciate you filling out our evaluation. There's a link in the chat box, and it should be in your maybe emailed as well. It just really helps us to provide feedback for all of these programs that we do, and so that we can make our programs better in the future. And so with that, I would like to thank all of my speakers. We really appreciate your time and expertise. Thank you all your audience, or all of our audience members, for their questions and your time. And with that, hopefully you can join us for our next session. We will be having another webinar this week, and that will be, I think my screen's on July 30th at 2 to 3:30 Central. So it would be great if you guys can join us. And thank you again to everyone, and we appreciate your time. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.